6 questions, 6 knives plunging into the buried truth beneath the flawless mask of a peaceful departure. But no departure is ever truly peaceful when the shadow of the hidden one lingers, hidden between missing pieces, between final breaths no one truly hears. Gene Hackman may be gone, but these 6 questions remain, demanding answers. From the dazzling lights of red carpet premieres to the post-Oscar parties that stretched into the early morning, Gene Hackman once had it all. The perks of an A-list star, a 2-time Oscar winner, one of the few to rise to the top without bowing to hidden forces. But behind that shining success, there was a Gene Hackman quietly closing doors, turning down Hollywood's glittering invitations and rejecting everything others deemed as glory. If you're intrigued by Gene Hackman's story and the hidden truths of Hollywood, hit like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with friends who'd enjoy it. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next exciting and shocking stories. Now, let's dive into this captivating tale. By the late 1980s, at the height of his career with films like Mississippi Burning and Unforgiven, Gene Hackman started pulling away from the limelight, stepping back from major events, award ceremonies, and those iconic photos with colleagues over glasses of champagne. All of it had become excess, things Hackman no longer valued. Hollywood had no loyalty, no conscience, only an unquenchable thirst for profit. That sharp truth wasn't a rash statement, but the culmination of everything Hackman had seen, endured, and absorbed over decades of navigating the glitz and the cold calculations behind the scenes. Hackman wasn't meant to be an idol. He openly confessed that he never felt at ease stepping onto a stage to accept an award. The pats on the back, the fake smiles exchanged behind velvet curtains, the congratulatory handshakes. Each one felt like a relentless stab in the back. It all repulsed him. Hackman once shared a story with a close friend. After receiving his first Oscar for The French Connection, he tore the bow off the statue and tossed it straight into the trash can in the men's restroom of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. His frustration wasn't a brief outburst. It was the result of decades of dissatisfaction that had been building for years. From the moment Hackman entered the industry with a simple dream of pursuing his passion for acting, he once said, "I didn't come here to be famous. I came here to work." But he quickly realized that Hollywood wasn't there to support passion. It was a place that devoured any soul bold enough to dream of fairness or true art. For years, Hackman became a thorn in the side of Hollywood's hidden powers. He turned down lucrative contracts, declined invitations to extravagant fundraising events, and even flatly rejected an offer to join the Academy. Hollywood was a vast trap where the weak betrayed each other just to survive a few more seasons. So, Hackman took a nearly unheard-of route. He severed all ties with power, shut the door on the media, and withdrew to a quiet life in New Mexico with his wife, Betsy Arakawa, the only woman in his life who had never broken his trust in kindness. Even as Hackman attempted to cut all ties with Hollywood, he couldn't shake the persistent presence trailing him. Calls from famous directors, scripts sent to his home. Despite no one knowing his exact address, everything felt like lingering ghosts, reminding him that no one could truly escape Hollywood's grasp. The worst of it all, the thing that slowly ate away at the work Hackman had tried to protect for decades, were the secrets he was forced to keep. Secrets about backstage parties, the hidden deals between powerful producers and young stars willing to do anything to step onto the red carpet. Hackman knew it all, and he despised himself for staying silent. So, in his final days, when sharp pains in his chest forced him to face life's limits, Hackman broke the silence he had kept for nearly 50 years. What he revealed became the first horrifying piece of the Hollywood puzzle he had long witnessed. Unlike his tough, stoic persona on screen, Gene Hackman in real life was a smoldering fire, ready to ignite when something didn't sit right with him. That fire burned brightest on the set of The French Connection in 1971, where Hackman portrayed Jimmy "Popeye" Doyle, the role that solidified his legacy. But behind the film's raw, gritty realism lay a period of intense tension, one that set the lead actor against a powerful film crew, transforming the set into a silent battlefield. Director William Friedkin was a giant in the industry, but his approach to filmmaking was a nightmare for anyone who didn't bend to his will. Known for his brutal directing methods, Friedkin pushed actors to their physical and mental extremes to capture raw, authentic performances. But for Hackman, the real battle wasn't just with the unforgiving director, it was with an unseen force behind the camera, a presence more powerful than anything on set. From his first days on set, Hackman could sense eyes on him, not just from the production team, but from somewhere darker. There were private calls, subtle offers from men he'd never met. They didn't talk scripts, acting, or anything artistic. Instead, they presented conditions, terms for invisible support, the kind that could make or break a career. Later, Hackman would refer to it as the dirty deal happening behind the scenes. During a late-night shoot, with the entire crew exhausted, Hackman stepped backstage to catch his breath in a dimly lit corner behind the studio where the streetlights cast an eerie glow. That's when he overheard it. A brief, hushed conversation between the producer and an unfamiliar man. The whispers mixed with cigarette smoke, but Hackman caught enough to understand. His role, the upcoming awards, even the trajectory of his career. It had all been planned long before. "We need a fresh face, but one we can control." The voice was so cold, it sent chills down Hackman's spine. By morning, his fury had reached its breaking point. He confronted Friedkin and the producer directly, but all he received were weak smiles and defiant stares. That was the moment Hackman understood. In this game, actors weren't artists. They were pawns. The scenes he filmed weren't just for the audience. They were tools, pieces in a much larger scheme unfolding behind the curtain. From that moment on, Hackman refused all private meetings with producers and avoided exclusive parties where secret deals were masked as casual exchanges. He understood that stepping through those doors meant paying a price, not just with his career, but with his soul. Few knew that Hackman was offered leading roles in at least 3 blockbuster films of the 1970s, all of which went on to win Oscars. He turned them all down. Not because of the scripts, but because each offer came with a list of non-artistic conditions. Private dinners with industry power players, unsigned contracts filled with vague clauses about promotional opportunities, and worst of all, demands that could never be put in writing. Demands so infuriating that Hackman reportedly tore a script apart the moment he finished reading it. There was a rumor in the industry, one Hackman never confirmed but that had circulated for years, that he had witnessed a secret deal to rig the Oscars. A powerful producer negotiating quietly with an Academy media representative. Not about the quality of a film, but about a post-award publicity package that would ensure the win had nothing to do with merit. From that point forward, Hackman lost faith in the Oscar race. To him, the golden statue wasn't a symbol of artistic achievement. It was a prize won behind closed doors. And as rumors spread throughout the studio that year, Hackman realized he no longer fit in there. In the quiet seaside room in Santa Fe, where Gene Hackman spent his final years escaping the chaos of the world, an old phone rang through the silence of the night. On the other end was a familiar voice, his closest friend for decades, the only person Hackman still trusted with the secrets he had buried for years. But this time, Hackman wasn't reaching out to relive the past. The stories he called to reveal. Hackman's voice was rough, each word cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. He began with a sentence as chilling as the night air seeping through a cracked window. "We sold our souls for fame, and I can't die carrying this burden." Outside, the New Mexico sky was pitch black, but the true darkness filled the room where Hackman sat. No lights, unlike usual. The whiskey on the table contained nothing but the memories he'd spent over 50 years trying to bury. Now they surged forth, unstoppable. Hackman recalled it slowly, each word feeling like a stone weighing down his chest. He spoke of a night in 1974 inside a Beverly Hills mansion, not just a gathering of A-list stars, but a room packed with powerful figures from media, production, and politics. It wasn't just a party. It was the night Hackman was first welcomed into the inner circle, a group of seasoned actors revered by Hollywood and the press. Yet behind the scenes, they kept secrets that could never be revealed. According to Hackman, the inner circle wasn't some clandestine group with elaborate rituals or blood oaths. The vow was silence, a pact among those who had witnessed too much, who knew too much about the dark secrets of the film capital. They were like shipwreck survivors, holding the truth about the disaster, but bound to silence if they wanted to preserve their lives and their careers. The greatest secret Hackman carried throughout his life, the one that ate away at his soul with each passing day, was the cover-up of Hollywood's most horrific crime. A child exploitation ring involving famous filmmakers, celebrated actors, and the shadowy figures who controlled the awards, the media, and the entire industry. In 1975, Hackman and a few familiar faces, once prominent actors who had faded from the spotlight, were invited to a private party. They thought it was just another chance to network with the powerful. But what unfolded behind those doors would haunt Hackman for the rest of his life. Beyond the velvet curtain, inside an extravagant room, was a scene he could never erase from his mind. Children, too young to understand what was happening, used as entertainment for men who called themselves moguls. The laughter, the applause, the firm handshakes after each exchange. Hackman absorbed it all, his eyes capturing every detail, his heart turning cold like a sheet of black ice. The next day, Hackman and a few fellow actors found themselves thrown into a nightmare they never expected. They were called into a sealed room and given two choices: sign a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for roles, fame, and protection, or speak out and watch their careers and possibly their lives crumble away. Hackman signed, not for fame, but because he knew that alone, he couldn't battle the colossal machine fueled by money and power. It wasn't just a confession. It was the tolling of a bell, swinging open the gates of hell, where Hollywood's darkest secrets lay in wait to be exposed. The small wooden house in Santa Fe, where Gene Hackman spent his final years, soon became a focal point after news of his passing spread. But not because of curious locals or tabloid reporters. A different group arrived first, people who never ventured into the light. They didn't bring flowers, they didn't light candles, they came for the tapes. Those tapes had long been a whispered legend in private conversations among veteran actors. Those who knew Hackman understood his habit of recording, not for blackmail or as a weapon, but simply to keep a record in case the truth ever needed to be revealed. Hackman called them his lifeline tapes, the only connection between him and his conscience. According to an anonymous insider, Hackman began this secret practice in the late 1980s, silently recording phone calls with producers, negotiations over roles, veiled threats against young actors who refused to comply, and even off-the-record conversations among Hollywood's power players. He recorded everything. Each tape was a piece of a puzzle in what Hackman referred to as the ugliest mosaic of power I've ever seen. Those tapes didn't just hold scattered voices. They were living proof of a system that had been running for decades. A system where prestigious awards weren't always given for talent, where faces disappeared from the screen for simply saying no, and where child actors were taught silence before they even knew the alphabet. Hackman once told a friend, "If you heard what I've heard, you'd never watch another Oscar night again." Now that Hackman was gone, so were the tapes. At the family's request, the Santa Fe police conducted a thorough search of the house, checking secret drawers, hidden compartments in bookshelves, even scanning every floor tile. No tapes, no cases. They had disappeared without a trace. Hackman's family, particularly his cousin who lived next door during his final years, confirmed seeing old tape reels neatly stacked inside a worn leather suitcase. Hackman never explained them. He only gave one instruction. If anything happened, they were not to be opened. Instead, they were to contact a single name, a former friend who had never appeared in any public photographs. When the police opened Hackman's storage room, the suitcase was gone, without a trace, not even a single note left behind. Someone had taken it. But the more terrifying question was, had Hackman managed to copy the tapes? And if so, where were they now? In the hands of an old colleague still on the same side? Locked away in the safe of a mysterious attorney in New York? Or had they already reached a newsroom where journalists were sitting on a ticking time bomb, just waiting for the right moment to detonate? Some Hollywood insiders revealed that Hackman wasn't the only one aware of the recordings. Certain directors, screenwriters, and even young actors who had been caught in shady dealings also knew about them, but no one dared to speak of them, because they understood that merely mentioning the missing tapes was like signing their own death sentence. If you find Gene Hackman's story worth reflecting on, leave a comment with the number 1. If not, leave a comment with the number 0. Now let's dive into more thought-provoking stories about Gene Hackman. As the lights dimmed over the empty streets of Santa Fe, only questions lingered in the darkness. What fragments of truth had Hackman left behind, and who or what force had the power to decide whether those secrets would ever be revealed? Hollywood remained silent, as if nothing had ever happened. But those who knew Hackman understood. The tapes weren't lost. They were simply in hiding, waiting for a hand brave enough to pull back the curtain of truth. From the day he walked off his final film set, Gene Hackman chose a path few Hollywood legends ever dared to take. A path of complete isolation and solitude. Santa Fe, New Mexico, with its arid hills and blood-red sunsets, became his ultimate refuge. A humble wooden house. No towering gates, no walls, no guards. Only the wind slicing through the cracks, as if every sound conspired with the haunting silence. Hackman tried to move on, but even there, Hollywood never truly let him go. You can leave Hollywood, but Hollywood will never leave you alone, he once said, during a private meeting with a few old friends in 2005, a statement that would linger like a haunting curse. One of those present remembered Hackman speaking with a calm demeanor, but beneath it all, there was a smoldering fear. The fear of a man who had seen too much, known too much, and carried secrets that were never meant to be uncovered. In his early years in New Mexico, Hackman kept sporadic contact with old friends, former colleagues, those who had once stood on the same side, defending what they called the artistic conscience. But over time, everything faded. The phone stopped ringing, handwritten letters went unanswered, and Hackman, in some way, had pushed himself into complete isolation. He once joked to his cousin, "If one day I disappear, no one will know." But it wasn't just a joke, it was a premonition. It was this very cousin who, after Hackman's death, began experiencing strange occurrences for years. Mysterious cars parked at a distance, sometimes speeding off into the night with no one in sight. Eerie late-night calls with only the sound of faint breathing before abruptly hanging up. Nameless letters containing only a few handwritten words. "We see you." Hackman never officially admitted he was being watched, but his cousin confirmed that he knew. Knew it well enough to always keep 2 suitcases in the house, one filled with personal belongings and the other with documents no one had ever seen. Hackman lived like an exile in his own home, always prepared to leave everything behind and vanish if necessary. Why? Because of what he knew and what he carried with him in his final years. He rejected every invitation to return, not for an honorary Oscar, not for a Lifetime Achievement Award, not for anniversary tributes. Partly because he despised Hollywood's hypocrisy, but mostly because he knew that the moment he stepped beyond the safe confines of Santa Fe, the old hands wouldn't hesitate to reach out and squeeze the last breath from his throat. Some called Hackman paranoid, but those who sat with him in that wooden house heard the disjointed fragments, the late-night parties in Beverly Hills, the deals made behind closed doors, the young stars who never got their chance to shine. They knew Hackman wasn't delusional. He was simply one of the few who had lived long enough to tell the story. But no one knows if those stories ever escaped Hackman's lips in time, or if they followed him into the abyss of eternal silence. Gene Hackman's final days were far from the peaceful twilight of a legendary figure enjoying his last years. Instead, they were suffocatingly tense, as if his final breaths were being choked away, each faint glimmer of daylight swallowed by the shadows of memories he could never erase. About 3 weeks before his death, his cousin noticed something unusual. Hackman, who had severed most ties with Hollywood long ago, was suddenly making calls. Not to younger colleagues, not to journalists who had once sought him out, but to a few old faces. Faces that belonged to a secret circle of silence, a pact Hackman had broken years ago. Once united as allies, they have since disappeared, not just from memory, but from existence itself. What's even more chilling is the bizarre manner of their deaths. Midnight car wrecks, fatal tumbles down their own staircases, or sudden, unexplained fatalities in their opulent Beverly Hills estates. The deaths appeared random, yet Hackman never bought into the idea of accidents in a world where men bartered their souls for fame. "I have no one left to talk to," he murmured one night, standing by his office window, his hand shaking as he clutched the old landline phone. Unanswered calls, voicemails left to echo in emptiness, voices once familiar, now silenced forever. In the desk drawer of Hackman's office after his death lay a collection of jumbled notes, scrawled in shaky, uneven handwriting. There was no start, no finish, just disjointed fragments of an unfinished puzzle scribbled onto crumpled paper, yet one line stood out. The same faces, the same hands, the same silence. This phrase echoed like a chilling refrain, repeated across several notes, as though Hackman had desperately tried to leave a message for anyone daring enough to read and brave enough to comprehend. The same faces, the familiar faces, the ones that smiled beside him on the red carpet, and the ones that crushed the careers and souls of those who dared to speak. The same hands, the hands that congratulated him when he won awards, and the same hands that signed the orders to silence inconvenient witnesses. The same silence, the silence that has endured for over 50 years, concealing Hollywood's most sinister secrets. When Gene Hackman's death was officially announced, it came with a neat and tidy cause, natural causes, a clean conclusion, leaving no room for curiosity to roam. But for those who understood the world Hackman had escaped, natural had never been a reality. Was it truly the end, or Hollywood's final warning to those who dared defy the rules? An old friend, one of the few survivors, spoke to the press after Hackman's funeral. Gene knew the rules. He knew them better than anyone. And he knew exactly what happens when you forget who makes them. Gene Hackman's story didn't end with a quiet grave in Santa Fe. It ended with the sharp slam of an office door. The first officer stepped into the wooden house, where a silent landline sat by the window, and beneath a drawer lay the final note. "I never wanted to survive." Hackman closed his eyes, but his last words rang out, not as a peaceful farewell, but as a scream ripping through the glittering mask Hollywood used to conceal its rotting conscience. That secret. Who dares to hear it all? Those words didn't come solely from a man on the edge of death, but from the voice of a tormented conscience. He had lived a life of glory, yet one shadowed by regret and sorrow. He had devoted his entire being to his art, but the price was paid in wounds and loss. In his final moments, he could no longer stay silent. He had to speak the truth, even if it had the power to shatter the world. Those left behind, will they dare face it? Will they have the courage to hear it through? Or will they turn a blind eye, cover their ears, and keep living in illusion and lies? Gene Hackman was gone, but his words lingered. A warning, a challenge, and perhaps the key that would shape the future of an entire industry. If the story of Gene Hackman and Hollywood's dark secrets surprised you, make sure to hit like, drop a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with friends who might find it intriguing. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video. In the case surrounding the death of the legendary Gene Hackman, a key piece of evidence opened up unexpected twists: his final call. What initially seemed like a moment of panic, this brief message contained crucial details that helped investigators uncover the truth behind Gene Hackman's tragic death. Join us as we delve into this investigation, exploring how a short call helped unravel the mystery and point to the real cause of this legend's departure. If you're curious to follow the untold details of the case, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our videos. Share your thoughts in the comments and join us on this journey to uncover the truth. Chapter 1. The Key of Silence. When silence becomes deafening. Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa's home had never been a place of loud noise. In his final years, Hackman lived in seclusion in the peace of Santa Fe, where sunlight filtered through old window panes, and every corner of the house was imbued with the scent of aged wood, the smell of time, gently covering every memory with a layer of green moss. However, the silence that enveloped the house since that fateful day was no longer the peaceful harmony it once was, but a heavy quiet filled with fear, a suffocating stillness, as though it was blocking every breeze that might reveal an event too indescribable to express. On that day, the first to break the wall of silence wasn't Gene Hackman, nor Betsy Arakawa, nor a neighbor or acquaintance. It was a plumber, a stranger who came to carry out a simple task. He was the first to notice something unusual. He wasn't a cop, certainly not a fortune teller, but the chill that ran down his spine when his hand touched the slightly open front door would haunt him for the rest of his life. The heavy walnut door, always kept firmly closed, was an unbreakable rule for Hackman, a man who believed in control and doors that were always locked. Yet, on that day, it was ajar, as if someone had hurriedly left or abandoned an unfinished journey. There were no signs of forced entry, no strange marks on the floor, no broken glass, but the eerie silence in the house made the worker stop, pull out his phone, and dial 911. The first call didn't come from Gene, nor from Betsy, but from a stranger. His voice trembled as he spoke to the dispatcher, unclear whether it was from fear or some invisible sensation that had crawled up his spine. The smell of damp wood filled the air, mingling with the scent of cold, unfinished food, a sign of meals left incomplete. Shaky hands had placed the food on the table, but never lifted them again. On the porch, the water bowls for the 3 dogs, Bear, Nikita, and Xena, were still full, but their familiar shapes were nowhere to be found. Gene Hackman was known for his extreme caution. He never left a door open, not even a small crack. The door, slightly ajar that day, felt like a silent message, a small sign left by someone to remind outsiders that behind that door, everything had spiraled out of control. All the outdoor security cameras were functioning normally, but strangely, the video footage from 36 hours before the 911 call was made was completely empty. There were no images, no sounds, no data, like everything that happened on that fateful night had been erased by an invisible hand. The maintenance worker didn't dare step inside. He stood at the threshold, looking down the dark hallway that stretched into the heart of the house, where the faint light from the back window revealed small dog footprints on the tile floor. These footprints scattered, as if Bear, Nikita, and Xena had frantically run around the house, chasing something or someone indefinable. Time in the house seemed to stand still, but an overwhelming sense of urgent desperation hung in the air, like a breathless note in the sorrowful symphony of fate. As the worker turned away, he felt himself trembling, not from the late winter chill, but from the strong intuition that he had just inadvertently opened the final door to the secret Gene Hackman had kept hidden in the last days of his life. The slightly ajar door didn't just open to the house, it opened to the silent hell in the life of a legend. Chapter 2. The Window to Terror. The fearful whisper of the worker echoed. Santa Fe, a quiet afternoon with the sun casting long streaks of light down the gravel road leading to Gene Hackman's house. No one could have imagined that this absolute calm concealed a nightmare churning deep behind the silent wooden door. The plumber, thinking he was merely stopping to fix a small issue, had unknowingly become the first witness to a tragedy even the boldest scripts wouldn't dare write. Gripping the cold wrench, the middle-aged man circled the house, searching for signs of life. After a moment's hesitation at the threshold, he couldn't bring himself to enter. Something was terribly wrong. Too quiet, too unsettling, as if something was clinging to every corner, every crevice. The instincts of an ordinary worker weren't enough to identify the feeling he was experiencing, but the rapid breaths and the pounding of his heart echoed in his ears, speaking volumes. He moved toward the back of the house, past the large window leading into the living room where Gene Hackman often sat, lost in a book under the warm light. What he saw took his breath away. Betsy Arakawa, the small woman with the gentle smile, lay there, motionless, her eyes wide open but no longer recognizing the world around her, like a tragic wax figure in the coziest room of Santa Fe. "Damn it! Damn it! Oh, damn it!" The man's voice shattered with each breath. He stepped back, his hands trembling as he searched for his phone in the pocket of his coat. His fingers were icy, not from the wind, but from the primal fear that had struck his nerves. Fear only those who have touched the door of death could understand. The 911 call echoed in the vast emptiness of the American West. Words chopped, stammered, chaotic. A stream of disordered language as the human mind was pushed to its breaking point. The dispatcher on the other end had heard countless emergency calls, but the way that voice slipped between fear and utter despair sent a chill down her spine. I saw someone in Hackman's house. Oh, damn it. She was just lying there. Oh, damn it. The fragmented pieces of the story tangled together, overlapping with heavy breaths and the sound of footsteps retreating from the window, as if the person feared that by standing too close, a cold hand would reach out from within and drag him into hell along with Gene and Betsy. When the Santa Fe police received the report, they never imagined that one of the most horrifying cases in local history would be ignited from the very house of Hollywood legend, Gene Hackman. This town was too small to hold such tragedies. The locals were used to land disputes, stolen trucks, or a few drunken brawls. No one was prepared for the scene the investigators would find when they stepped through the slightly ajar wooden door. Betsy lay on the carpet, her arm limp, her eyes wide open, but without any sign of extreme fear on her face. That only made everything more confusing. She hadn't struggled, hadn't resisted. There were no signs of a fight. She simply lay there, as if she had surrendered to something. Something she had known, something she had predicted, something that had made the strong woman not even attempt to run. Outside the window, the maintenance worker stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the body through the glass. It felt as though Betsy was still watching him, through the cold pane, across the boundary between life and death. By the time the police arrived, the house had been sealed off. But the real mystery, the most horrifying part, wasn't in the living room where Betsy lay. It was what awaited behind the closed door at the end of the hallway. Gene Hackman's office, where his final call had been made, where the real story was just beginning. Chapter 3: The Final Call. What did Gene Hackman say? The old phone was found right beside Gene Hackman's body, lying askew in the corner of the cold mudroom, as if it too had witnessed the final moments of the man who once stood at the pinnacle of Hollywood. A thin layer of dust on the screen was wiped away by someone's finger, revealing hasty usage, unsent messages, missed calls, and amidst the chaos, one call had been made. Gene Hackman's final call. A leaked source from an anonymous investigator revealed that Gene Hackman made a call before collapsing. Not a random call, not a lengthy conversation. It was very brief, just a few seconds. But every word spoken from the phone Gene gripped in his hand became an obsession, even for the most seasoned investigators. "I can't breathe. Something's wrong with Betsy." A simple sentence, but heavy with meaning. According to sources, Gene's voice had grown hoarse, his breaths uneven, as if each word had to fight against the pain tightening around his chest. The investigator listened to the recording extracted from the switchboard over and over, analyzing each breath, every long pause between his words. In Gene's voice, there was an underlying fear, a feeling only those who have witnessed war, those who have survived near-death experiences, truly understand. Gene Hackman, who had tirelessly worked on film sets, standing alongside great names and playing powerful roles, unafraid of both heaven and hell, found his voice trembling like a child in his final moments. Was it because he felt that this time everything was different? Why did Gene mention Betsy in that call? Investigators believe this is the most crucial clue. He didn't call to report danger to himself, but to mention Betsy, the woman who had been by his side for decades. This shows that in his final moments, Gene wasn't thinking about himself. He was worried about Betsy. He sensed that something was wrong with her, even before the crisis unfolded with him. A strange detail was revealed from the sound analysis. Interspersed between Gene's fragmented words was the sound of a dog barking in the distance, possibly from the bathroom where Betsy was found. This reinforced the theory that Gene had sensed something was wrong with his wife, perhaps a sign of a health crisis or some unusual event unfolding right before him. And then, as he tried to call for help, he too fell into a state of danger. Investigators were seriously considering whether the call had been interrupted by a medical factor, such as a sudden heart attack or an acute symptom, or if there had been some external interference. But from any angle, this final call wasn't just a cry for help from a husband worried about his wife. It could also be a final testament, the last key to unlocking the truth about what really happened in that cold $3.8 million mansion. Another source from the telecommunications center revealed a chilling detail. Before the line cut off, there was a long, drawn-out breath, unclear whether it was Gene or someone else in the house. It wasn't the breath of someone trying to catch their breath, but rather like the exhale of someone taking their final breath, an unmistakable sound, one that haunted every investigator who heard it. What terrified everyone wasn't just what Gene said, but what he never had the chance to say. Something had happened between Gene and Betsy, something only they could understand. And when the final call was made, it wasn't just the fading voice of a legend. It was the sound of a buried secret, a secret that might never be revealed. Outside the house where the two bodies were found, the light of Santa Fe stretched on as usual. But for those who knew about Gene Hackman's last call, that light was just a thin veil concealing the storm of truth that was about to sweep everything away. If you find the story of Gene Hackman's death interesting and captivating, leave a comment with the number 1. If not, leave a comment with the number 0. Now, let's dive into the next developments of the story. Chapter 4. Pills, Prescriptions, and Unanswered Questions. The white, yellow, and blue pills were scattered across the table, spilling onto the floor like pieces of a puzzling riddle. Among them, a single open bottle lay on its side, the label still clearly visible with the doctor's name, the patient's name, and small dosage warnings. The investigators sat there for a long time, their eyes scanning every word, every mark left on the surface of the bottle, desperately trying to find any clue that could answer the most haunting question: what really happened to Gene and Betsy Hackman? There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of forced entry, no screams or crashing sounds heard from neighbors in the 24 hours before the two bodies were discovered. And most importantly, there were no external wounds on either of the couple. Investigators had to return to the scattered pills on the table. They weren't just physical evidence, but fragments of the mental turmoil of an elderly couple who had spent nearly 30 years together, witnessing glory, storms, and undercurrents that no one else had ever known. Gene Hackman, who had stood at the pinnacle of the film industry, appeared before millions with a tough exterior, had actually lived with a weak heart for many years. His heart condition wasn't a secret to those closest to him. Treatments, prescriptions, regular checkups, and mornings when he sat quietly on the porch, gently stroking his wedding ring as if searching for the final piece, all of it was documented in the medical records collected by the police. However, there was one thing not mentioned in any records: Betsy's psychological instability. The woman who always smiled in photos with her husband had actually fallen into unanticipated bouts of depression. Close friends recalled that Betsy would often sit for hours by the window, her gaze fixed outside, occasionally bursting into tears for reasons unknown. After Gene announced his retirement, the spotlight faded, and their large home in Santa Fe became a sealed box where two aging souls were trapped in long, suffocating days. The investigators carefully examined each pill. Some antidepressants listed in Betsy's medical records, some heart medications for Gene. But among them there were strange pills, unlabeled and of uncertain origin. Who brought them into the house? Who opened that final bottle? At the first meeting of the investigation team, the hypothesis of a drug overdose was brought to the table, but something didn't add up. Older, reclusive couples with limited social interaction rarely fall into the tragedy of overdosing like young Hollywood stars. A sophisticated poisoning? A medication mix-up due to memory loss? Or could it have been Gene, in a moment of desperation, who opened that bottle himself? The biggest question still hung in the air of the Santa Fe police meeting room. Gene and Betsy. Who took the first pill? And as that pill slid down their throats, what did it carry with it? A plan carefully laid out in advance, or simply a fateful mistake? As the forensic team carefully gathered the remaining pills, the late sunlight streamed through the window, casting light onto the corner of the table where an open bottle of medication lay still, like a mute witness. In that dim light, it almost seemed as though two faint shadows lingered. Gene Hackman and Betsy, hand in hand, silently watching the investigation unfold, unraveling the mysteries surrounding their final moments. Chapter 5. The Unlocked Door. Who left? Who stayed? The dark wooden door, covered in the dust of time, opened to a narrow, suffocating gap. The faint light of the late afternoon filtered through the crack, casting a hazy streak on the cold tile floor. That was how the first investigators saw the home of Gene and Betsy Hackman on that fateful afternoon. No doors were locked, no chains, no barriers separating the outside world from the two lifeless bodies inside. For anyone who had ever known Gene Hackman, this was completely out of character. At any age, Gene had always been obsessed with security. During his years under the Hollywood spotlight, he received countless threatening letters from obsessive fans and had to face photographers willing to do anything to invade the private lives of famous stars. Even after stepping away from the limelight and moving to Santa Fe, Gene continued the nightly ritual of checking the doors. His friends used to joke that he locked the doors so carefully that even Betsy, if she spent too long picking flowers in the garden, would have to knock several times to get back into the house. Yet, on that day, the front door was unlocked. The door leading to the backyard was only slightly ajar, revealing a patch of withered grass blown by the wind. There were no signs of a break-in, no strange mud stains, no suspicious footprints. Everything was eerily silent. The only thing left were the doors open, almost as if someone had hurriedly left or intentionally left behind a wordless message. Betsy Hackman, according to neighbors, had a fear of strangers. She rarely opened the door to anyone who hadn't called ahead. Even delivery workers were only allowed to leave packages outside the gate. Because of this, when news of the unlocked doors leaked, local media immediately raised suspicions. Was there a third party present in the house that day? Someone familiar enough that Gene and Betsy didn't feel the need to be cautious, yet also someone who witnessed or became involved in the final tragedy? There were no signs of a struggle, no belongings disturbed, and every corner of the house remained as tidy as if the couple had just finished lunch and suddenly vanished from this world. This quickly dismissed the hypothesis of a break-in or attack. But what could be more terrifying than violence? It was the silent presence of someone who knew the house well, who understood Gene and Betsy, who knew every little habit of theirs, a person who didn't need to break the door, didn't need to search for anything because their very presence was the answer. The investigation team reviewed the security camera system in the area. Santa Fe wasn't equipped with many surveillance cameras, but in a quiet neighborhood, most of the surrounding households had basic recording devices installed. The data from the 24 hours prior to the discovery of the body was collected and analyzed, with each frame slowed down. The result? No suspicious individuals were recorded entering or leaving Gene and Betsy's home. No strangers, no unusual vehicles, no strange sounds. This led to an even more chilling hypothesis. Was someone inside the house, staying for an extended period before leaving without leaving a trace? Or was there a hand that intervened, erasing all evidence and causing the camera system to go blind at the most critical moment? Amid the storm of speculation, one persistent question crept into the mind of every investigator. If Gene and Betsy weren't the last to lock the door, then who opened it? And why? Why, in a house that had been securely locked for years, was the door left ajar that day, as if waiting for someone to return? As the last light of day faded on the threshold, it felt as though the door didn't just open to the outside world, but to a dark secret, where truth and lies, life and death, merged into a maze from which there was no escape. Chapter 6. Echoes from Mudroom, the haunting in the final recording. The small, cramped room, barely large enough for an old wooden shelf, on which sat a few pairs of sneakers and worn rubber boots, still stained with dried mud from the backyard. This was Mudroom, a space Gene Hackman had rarely spent time in during his life, yet it became the place where he collapsed, his body contorted into an odd position, his thin hand still gripping the phone, a silent witness holding the unsaid words of his final moments. Why was Gene there? What could have driven a 94-year-old man, once a star who walked the prestigious red carpets, to fall in such a confined space, used only for storing shoes and umbrellas? The crime scene investigators spent hours examining every tiny detail. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no evidence of a life-or-death battle. Only a chilling silence, as if Gene had stepped into Mudroom carrying an invisible fear, only to collapse right at the threshold. The first hypothesis suggested that Gene tried to run out the front door to seek help, but at that moment, the door was ajar, not locked. This completely contradicted Gene's survival instinct, as he was always obsessed with locking the doors at night. If Gene truly wanted to seek help from outside, why didn't he run to the garden, just a few steps from the main road? Why did he stop in Mudroom, the only room without windows and no way to see outside? The second hypothesis was even more chilling. Gene hadn't gone outside to escape. He was running from something within his own home, from something he had either heard or witnessed just before collapsing. The forensic team had searched all of Mudroom, every pair of shoes, every small trace of mud, but found nothing unusual. However, as they continued to examine the phone in Gene's hand, the door to the true secret began to open. The phone wasn't just a means of communication, it was a silent witness to Gene Hackman's final moments. The phone still had battery, but the lock screen wouldn't open. The investigators used special techniques to back up all the data on the device, searching for recent calls, unsent messages, even audio recording apps or personal logs. Then they discovered a short audio file, a recording that lasted less than 11 seconds, but enough to send chills down the spine of even the toughest. The recording began with heavy, labored, and broken breaths, as if Gene was struggling to swallow the fear rising in his throat. His voice trembled, fragmented, but one sentence rang out clearly amid the chaotic sounds. "Something's wrong with Betsy. I can't breathe." Immediately after those words, there was no loud noise, no objects falling, no screams or struggles, only a silence that lasted for 3 seconds, followed by a small click, the sound of a finger tapping the phone screen. The location data from the phone also revealed something puzzling. Just minutes before the recording was made, Gene's location moved from the living room into mudroom, with no indication he went upstairs or stepped into the garden. The entire house seemed to have trapped him in a closed loop, unable to escape. The investigation team immediately expanded their search to include Betsy's phone, hoping to find signs of contact between the couple in those final moments. However, Betsy's phone had mysteriously shut off the night before. No calls, no messages, no apps open, almost as if someone had deliberately erased every trace from her device. Why did Gene Hackman hold the phone, recording a brief panicked clip before collapsing in mudroom, a place where no one in the house had ever stayed long? What had he heard? What had he seen? Or had his own hand accidentally uncovered a truth that had never been revealed? Outside mudroom, the front door remained slightly ajar. The cold breeze of the late afternoon slipped through the crack, like the breath of an unseen stranger, witnessing the final act of Gene Hackman's life, but never revealing itself. As night descended on Santa Fe, the phone rang in the wooden house, breaking the silence. On the other end, Gene Hackman's voice trembled, no longer the warm, resonant sounds of a legend, but the faint whisper of a man facing his final moment. "Betsy, I'm sorry, I can't." A choked sob, followed by silence. The call ended, but those words hung in the air like a belated confession, like an explanation left unfinished. In the mysterious case surrounding Gene Hackman's death, an unexpected piece of evidence stood out: the final call he made. What initially seemed like a moment of panic and desperation turned out to be a crucial clue, helping to unravel the chilling truth behind his death. In this video, we will dive into the investigation and explore how that brief 11-second call ultimately helped investigators discover the true cause of his death. If you find this case full of surprises and hidden twists, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to stay updated on the next exciting investigations. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on any other intriguing stories. See you in the next video. 6 questions, 6 knives stabbing into the buried truth beneath the perfect facade of a peaceful departure. But no departure is peaceful when the hand of the hidden one still lurks somewhere, between pieces that never quite fit together, between final breaths that no one truly hears. Gene Hackman is gone, but these 6 questions still await answers. From the bright lights of red carpet premieres to the post-Oscar parties that lasted until dawn, Gene Hackman once had it all. The privileges of an A-list star, a man who held 2 prestigious Oscars, one of the rare few to reach the pinnacle without compromising to any hidden powers. But behind that dazzling glory was a Gene Hackman quietly shutting doors, pushing away all of Hollywood's flashy invitations, and rejecting everything people called glory. If you're curious about the story of Gene Hackman and the secrets of Hollywood, don't forget to hit like, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and share this video with friends who might be interested. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next exciting and surprising stories. Now, let's dive into this fascinating story. By the late 1980s, when his career reached its peak with Mississippi Burning and Unforgiven, Gene Hackman began distancing himself from major events, award headlines, and the photos with colleagues over glasses of sparkling champagne. All of it had become luxury items Hackman no longer cared for. Hollywood had no loyalty, no conscience, only an insatiable hunger for profit. That sharp declaration wasn't a hasty remark, but the pinnacle of what he had seen, lived through, and absorbed into every fiber of his being during decades of struggle between the flashbulbs and the calculations behind the scenes. Hackman wasn't born to be an idol. He bluntly admitted that he never felt comfortable stepping onto a stage to accept an award. The way hands patted his back, the fake smiles exchanged behind the velvet curtains, the congratulatory handshakes that followed, each one felt like an unforgiving stab in the back. It all disgusted him. There's a story Hackman once told a close friend, that right after receiving his first Oscar for his role in The French Connection, he removed the bow from the statue and threw it straight into the trash can in the men's restroom of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. His frustration didn't erupt in a few fleeting moments. It was the culmination of decades of dissatisfaction. From the moment Hackman entered the industry with a simple dream of living his passion for acting, he once said, "I didn't come here to be famous, I came here to work." But he soon realized that Hollywood didn't exist to nurture passion. It existed to devour any soul that dared to dream too much of fairness or pure art. For a long time, Hackman became a thorn in the side of the hidden powers in Hollywood. He turned down lucrative contracts, refused to attend lavish fundraising events, and even bluntly rejected an invitation to join the Academy. Hollywood was a massive trap where the weak were willing to betray each other just to survive a few more seasons. So, Hackman chose a nearly unheard-of path, severing all ties with power, shutting the door on the media, and retreating to live a secluded life in New Mexico with his wife, Betsy Arakawa, the only woman in his life who had never betrayed his faith in kindness. Even as Hackman tried to sever all ties with Hollywood, he couldn't escape the stalking presence behind him. Calls from famous directors, scripts sent to his home, even though no one knew his exact address, everything felt like ghosts clinging to his life, reminding him that no one could truly escape Hollywood's control. And the worst of it all, the thing that smoldered and consumed the work Hackman had tried to protect for decades, were the secrets he was forced to keep. Secrets about the backstage parties, the covert deals between powerful producers and young stars willing to do anything to step onto the red carpet. Hackman knew, and he hated himself for staying silent. So, in his final days, when sharp pains in his chest forced him to confront the limits of life, Hackman broke the vow of silence he had kept for nearly half a century. What he said became the first piece in the horrifying puzzle of Hollywood that he had witnessed. Unlike his cool, hardened persona on screen, Gene Hackman in real life was a smoldering fire, ready to ignite whenever he faced something that didn't sit right with him. That fire burned its fiercest on the set of The French Connection in 1971, where Hackman took on the role of Jimmy Popeye Doyle, the character that cemented his legacy. But behind the film's raw, gritty realism was a period of intense tension, one that pitted the lead actor against a powerful film crew, turning the set into a silent battlefield. Director William Friedkin was a towering name in the industry, but his working style was a nightmare for anyone who refused to submit. Known for his ruthless directing methods, Friedkin pushed actors to their absolute physical and mental limits to capture raw, authentic performances. But for Hackman, the battle wasn't just with an unforgiving director. It was with an unseen force lurking behind the camera, a presence more powerful than anything on set. From his earliest days on set, Hackman could feel the eyes watching him, not just from the production team, but from somewhere else. There were private calls, subtle offers from men he had never met before. They didn't discuss scripts, acting, or anything artistic. Instead, they laid out conditions, terms in exchange for invisible support, the kind of backing that could make or break a career. Later, Hackman would call it the dirty deal behind the scenes. During a late-night shoot, with the entire crew exhausted, Hackman stepped backstage to catch his breath in the dimly lit corner behind the studio, where the streetlights cast an eerie glow. That's when he overheard it, a brief, hushed conversation between the producer and an unfamiliar man. The whispers blended with cigarette smoke, but Hackman heard enough. His role, the next awards, even the trajectory of his career, it had all been arranged in advance. We need a fresh face, but one we can control. The voice was so cold it sent chills down Hackman's spine. By morning, his pent-up fury exploded. He confronted Friedkin and the producer directly, but the only response he received was weak smiles and defiant stares. That was the moment Hackman realized. In this game, actors weren't artists. They were pawns. The scenes he filmed weren't just for audiences. They were tools, pieces in a much larger scheme unfolding behind the curtain. From that moment on, Hackman refused all private meetings with producers and avoided exclusive parties where secret deals were disguised as friendly exchanges. He knew that stepping through those doors meant paying a price, not just with his career, but with his soul. Few people knew that Hackman was offered leading roles in at least 3 blockbuster films of the 1970s, all of which later won Oscars. He turned them all down, not because of the scripts, but because each offer came with a list of non-artistic conditions. Private dinners with industry power players, undated contracts filled with vague clauses about promotional opportunities, and worst of all, demands that could never be put in writing. Demands so infuriating that Hackman reportedly tore a script apart the moment he finished reading it. There was an industry rumor, one Hackman never confirmed but had circulated for years, that he had witnessed a secret deal to rig the Oscars. A powerful producer quietly negotiating with an Academy media representative, not about the quality of a film, but about a post-award publicity package that would guarantee the win had nothing to do with merit. From that moment on, Hackman never believed in the Oscar campaign again. To him, the Golden Statue wasn't a reward for art. It was a trophy earned through handshakes in the shadows. And as the whispers echoed through the studio that year, night after night, Hackman knew he no longer belonged there. In the small seaside room in Santa Fe, where Gene Hackman spent his final years avoiding the noise of the world, an old phone rang deep into the night. On the other end was a familiar voice, his closest friend for decades, the only person Hackman still trusted enough to share the truths he had buried since his youth. But this time, Hackman wasn't calling to reminisce. the stories he called to confess. Hackman's voice was hoarse, each word slicing through the air like a blade. He began with a sentence as cold as the night wind slipping through a cracked window. "We sold our souls for fame, and I can't die with this weight on my shoulders." Outside, the New Mexico sky was pitch black, but the real darkness filled the room where Hackman sat. No lights. Unlike usual, the whiskey on the table held nothing but the memories he had tried to bury for over half a century. Now they were rising like a flood, unstoppable. Hackman recounted it slowly, as if each word was a stone pressing against his chest. He spoke of a night in 1974, inside a Beverly Hills mansion, not just a gathering of A-list stars, but a room filled with powerful figures from media, production, and politics. It wasn't just a party. It was the night Hackman was first inducted into the Inner Circle, a group of veteran actors canonized by Hollywood in the press. Yet behind the curtain, they guarded secrets that could never be spoken. According to Hackman, the Inner Circle wasn't some secret society with elaborate rituals or blood oaths. The vow was silence, a pact among those who had seen too much, who knew too much about the dark underbelly of the film capital. They were like survivors of a shipwreck, holding the truth about what caused the disaster, but forced into silence if they wanted to keep their lives and their careers. And the greatest secret Hackman carried throughout his life, the one that eroded his soul day by day, was the cover-up of Hollywood's most heinous crime. A child exploitation ring involving renowned filmmakers, celebrated actors, and the shadowy figures who pulled the strings behind awards, media, and the entire industry. In 1975, Hackman and a few familiar faces, once famous actors who had since faded from the limelight, were invited to a private party. They thought it was just another opportunity to network with power, but what happened behind those doors haunted Hackman for the rest of his life. Beyond the velvet curtain, inside a lavish room, was a scene he could never unsee. Children, too young to understand what was happening, being used as entertainment for men who called themselves moguls. The laughter, the applause, the firm handshakes after each exchange. Hackman took it all in, his eyes recording every detail, his heart freezing over like a sheet of black ice. The next day, Hackman and a few fellow actors found themselves plunged into a living hell they never saw coming. They were summoned to a sealed room and given two choices: sign a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for roles, fame, and safety, or speak up and watch their careers, and possibly their lives, vanish like dust. Hackman signed, not for fame, but because he understood that alone he couldn't fight the massive machine powered by money and influence. It wasn't just a confession, it was the tolling of a bell, swinging open the gates of hell, where Hollywood's dirtiest secrets waited to be exposed. The small wooden house in Santa Fe, where Gene Hackman spent his final years, quickly became the center of attention after news of his passing spread, but not because of curious locals or tabloid reporters. A different group arrived first, people who never stepped into the light. They didn't bring flowers, they didn't light candles, they came for the tapes. Those tapes had long been a whispered legend in private conversations among veteran actors. Those who knew Hackman understood his habit of recording, not for blackmail, not as a weapon against anyone, but simply to preserve living proof in case the truth ever needed to be exposed. Hackman called them his lifeline tapes, the only tether between him and his conscience. According to an anonymous insider, Hackman began this secret habit in the late 1980s, quietly recording phone calls with producers, negotiations over roles, veiled threats against young actors who refused to comply, and even off-the-record conversations between Hollywood's power brokers. He recorded everything. Each tape was a puzzle piece in what Hackman called the ugliest mosaic of power I've ever seen. Those tapes didn't just contain scattered voices. They were living proof of a system that had operated for decades. A system where prestigious awards weren't always given for talent, where faces suddenly vanished from the screen simply for saying no, and where child actors were forced to learn silence before they even knew the alphabet. Hackman once told a friend, "If you heard what I've heard, you'd never watch another Oscar night again." Now that Hackman was gone, so were the tapes. At the family's request, the Santa Fe police conducted a thorough search of the house, secret drawers, hidden compartments in bookshelves, even scanning every floor tile. No tapes, no cases. They had vanished without a trace. Hackman's family, especially his cousin who lived next door during his final 10 years, confirmed seeing old tape reels neatly stacked inside a worn leather suitcase. Hackman never explained them. He only gave one instruction. If anything happened, they were not to be opened. Instead, they were to contact a single name, a former friend who had never appeared in any public photographs. When the police opened Hackman's storage room, the suitcase was gone, without a trace, without a single note left behind. Someone had taken it. But the more terrifying question was, had Hackman managed to copy the tapes? And if so, where were they now? In the hands of an old colleague who stood on the same side? Locked away in the safe of a mysterious attorney in New York? Or had they already made their way to a newsroom, where journalists sat on a ticking time bomb, just waiting for the right moment to detonate? Some Hollywood insiders revealed that Hackman wasn't the only one who knew about the existence of the recordings. Certain directors, screenwriters, and even young actors who had been targeted in shadowy dealings were also aware, but no one dared to speak of them, because they understood that merely mentioning the missing tapes was the same as signing their own death sentence. If you find the story of Gene Hackman's life worth reflecting on, leave a comment with the number 1. If not, leave a comment with the number 0. Next, let's dive into more thought-provoking stories about Gene Hackman. As the lights dimmed over the empty streets of Santa Fe, only questions lingered in the darkness. What fragments of truth had Hackman left behind? And who, or what force, held the power to decide whether those secrets would ever come to light? Hollywood remained silent as if nothing had ever happened, but those who knew Hackman understood. The tapes weren't lost. They were merely in hiding, waiting for a hand brave enough to pull back the curtain of truth. From the day he walked off his final film set, Gene Hackman chose a path few Hollywood icons ever dared to take, a path of complete isolation and solitude. Santa Fe, New Mexico, with its Ade Hills and blood-red sunsets, became his final refuge. A modest wooden house. No towering gates, no walls, no guards. Only the wind slicing through the cracks, as if every sound there conspired with the absolute silence. Hackman tried to move on, but even there, Hollywood never truly let him go. "You can leave Hollywood, but Hollywood will never leave you alone," he once said during a private meeting with a few old friends in 2005, a statement that would linger like a haunting curse. One of those present recalled that Hackman spoke with a quiet demeanor, but beneath the surface lay a smoldering fear, the fear of a man who had seen too much, knew too much, and carried secrets that were never meant to exist. In his early years in New Mexico, Hackman maintained sporadic contact with old friends, former colleagues, those who once stood on the same side, defending what they called the artistic conscience. But over time, everything faded. The phone stopped ringing, handwritten letters found no recipients, and Hackman, in some way, had pushed himself into complete isolation. He once joked to his cousin, "If one day I disappear, no one will know." But it wasn't just a joke, it was a premonition. It was this very cousin who, after Hackman's death, began experiencing strange occurrences for years. Mysterious cars parked at a distance, sometimes speeding off into the night with no one in sight. Eerie late-night calls with only the sound of faint breathing before abruptly hanging up, nameless letters containing only a few handwritten words. "We see you." Hackman never officially admitted he was being watched, but his cousin confirmed that he knew it well enough to always keep two suitcases in the house, one filled with personal belongings and the other with documents no one had ever seen. Hackman lived like an exile in his own home, always ready to leave everything behind and disappear if necessary. Why? Because of what he knew and what he carried with him in his final years. He rejected every invitation to return. No honorary Oscar, no Lifetime Achievement Award, no anniversary tributes. Partly because he despised Hollywood's hypocrisy, but mostly because he knew that the moment he stepped beyond the safe confines of Santa Fe, the old hands wouldn't hesitate to reach out and squeeze the last breath from his throat. Some called Hackman paranoid, but those who sat with him in that wooden house heard the disjointed fragments. The late-night parties in Beverly Hills, the deals made behind closed doors, the young stars who never got their chance to shine. They knew Hackman wasn't delusional. He was simply the last of the few who had lived long enough to tell the story. But no one knows if those stories ever escaped Hackman's lips in time, or if they followed him into the abyss of eternal silence. Gene Hackman's final days were far from the peaceful twilight of a legendary figure enjoying his last years. Instead, they were suffocatingly tense, as if his final breaths were being choked away, each faint glimmer of daylight swallowed by the shadows of memories he could never erase. About 3 weeks before his death, his cousin noticed something unusual. Hackman, who had severed most ties with Hollywood long ago, was suddenly making calls, not to younger colleagues, not to journalists who had once sought him out, but to a few old faces, faces that belonged to a secret circle of silence, a pact Hackman had broken years ago. They were once allies, but now most had vanished, not just from memory, but from life itself. More terrifying still, they had all died under strange circumstances. Midnight car crashes, fatal falls down their own staircases, or sudden unexplained deaths in the lavish mansions of Beverly Hills. The deaths seemed random, but Hackman never believed in accidents in a world where men had sold their souls for glory. "I have no one left to talk to," he once mumbled, standing by his office window, his hand trembling as he gripped the old landline phone. Unanswered calls, voicemails that would never be returned, familiar voices. now silenced forever. In the desk drawer of Hackman's office after his death, a series of scattered notes lay written in shaky, uneven handwriting. No beginning, no end, just hurried fragments of an unfinished puzzle scribbled onto crumpled paper, but one line stood out. The same faces, the same hands, the same silence. That phrase echoed like a haunting refrain, repeated across multiple notes, as if Hackman was desperately etching a message for anyone curious enough to read and brave enough to understand. The same faces, the old faces, the ones who smiled beside him on the red carpet, and the ones who buried the careers and souls of those who dared to speak. The same hands, the hands that patted his back when he won awards, and the same hands that signed the orders to erase inconvenient witnesses. The same silence, the silence that has lasted for over half a century, shielding Hollywood's darkest secrets. Gene Hackman's death, when officially announced, had a neat and tidy cause, natural causes. A clean conclusion, leaving no loose ends for the curious to chase. But for those who understood the world Hackman had fled, natural had never existed. Was it truly the end? Or Hollywood's final warning to those who dared to break the rules? An old friend, one of the few survivors, spoke to the press after Hackman's funeral. Gene knew the rules. He knew them better than anyone. And he knew exactly what happens when you forget who makes them. Gene Hackman's story didn't end with a quiet grave in Santa Fe. It ended with the slam of an office door behind him. The first officer stepped into the wooden house, where a silent landline sat by the window, and beneath a drawer lay the final note, "I never wanted to survive." Gene Hackman closed his eyes, but his last words echoed, not as a farewell melody, but as a scream tearing through the glittering mask Hollywood used to hide its decaying conscience. That secret, who dares to hear it all? Those words did not come only from a man on the brink of leaving this world, but from the voice of a tormented conscience. He had lived a life of glory, yet one filled with regret and remorse. He had dedicated his entire existence to art, but the price he paid was wounds and loss. In his final moments, he could no longer remain silent. He had to speak the truth, even if it had the power to shake the world. Those who are left behind, will they dare to face it? Will they have the courage to hear it to the end, or will they choose to cover their ears, shut their eyes, and continue living in illusion and deceit? Gene Hackman was gone, but his words remained, a warning, a challenge, and perhaps the answer that would determine the fate of an entire industry. If you're surprised by the story of Gene Hackman and the secrets of Hollywood, don't forget to hit like, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and share this video with friends who might be interested. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Gene Hackman, a Hollywood legend known for his roles in Unforgiven and The French Connection, lived a life full of glory, wealth, and admiration. But behind the grandeur of the secluded mansion in Santa Fe, a dark and eerie mystery was quietly unfolding. When the FBI investigated his abandoned house after his sudden death, they uncovered a secret beneath the floorboards that no one could have imagined. A hidden tunnel that could reveal a darker story than anyone had ever imagined. What did they find there? And what secrets had Hackman been hiding? Before we dive deeper into uncovering this secret, don't forget to like the video if you find the story intriguing, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any videos on unsolved mysteries. Be sure to share this video with your friends and family so we can explore these shocking truths about one of Hollywood's biggest stars together. A love story turned tragic. For over 3 decades, Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa were the epitome of an inseparable, devoted couple. She wasn't just his life partner, but also his dedicated companion during the final years of his life, as Hackman slowly fell into the darkness of Alzheimer's disease. For a man with a sharp mind like Hackman, the disease was nothing short of a curse. Scripts he once had memorized turned into blank pages. Characters who were once a part of him began to fade from memory, and the only person helping him hold on to the fragments of his life was Betsy. She knew when he needed his medication, when he needed assistance going down the stairs, and when he was simply lost in his past memories. Every day she would read him articles about cinema, reminding him of the glorious moments Hackman may have forgotten. But one day, that routine suddenly stopped. On February 11th, Betsy Arakawa left the house to go shopping as usual. The store's security cameras captured footage of her picking out items, stopping at a CVS pharmacy, and even buying some toys for their 3 dogs. No one thought it would be the last time they saw her. When the FBI later reviewed the security footage at the house, they saw her return, open the door as usual, and then disappear inside, never to be seen again. Hackman, with his worsening Alzheimer's, likely didn't understand what was happening. He didn't call for help, didn't leave the house, just sat there in an increasingly shrinking world, waiting for his wife to wake him up the next morning. But that morning never came. When investigators entered the house after nearly 2 weeks with no signs of activity, they were met with a scene that left them speechless. Hackman was still sitting there in his favorite chair, sunglasses still on, cane beside him, silent as if he were waiting for Betsy to appear from the kitchen with a hot cup of tea. But the house was eerily silent, with no music, no television, no signs of daily life. And when they entered the bedroom, they realized why. Betsy Arakawa was lying there on the bed in a chilling scene. Pills were scattered on the floor, a notebook open with scribbled words, unfinished sentences. Investigators believe that Hackman likely didn't understand that his wife had passed away. Late-stage Alzheimer's may have caused him to not recognize reality. Perhaps in Hackman's mind, Betsy was still alive. He may have waited for her for an entire week, not eating or drinking, just sitting there, lost between reality and the illusions of his memories. When the FBI checked the refrigerator, they found that food was still untouched. Hackman couldn't care for himself. He had forgotten how to turn on the stove, or even how to get water in the days after Betsy's death. He likely just sat there, waiting, as time wore him down day by day. But he didn't think much about it. He lived quite reclusively, with one neighbor saying, "We just thought he wanted privacy." No one realized that inside that house, an elderly man sat there, completely helpless, unsure how to face reality. Perhaps if someone had discovered him earlier, things might have been different. But in a world where everyone is too busy with their own lives, Hackman and Betsy's story became a silent tragedy unfolding behind closed doors. When the police collected their personal belongings, one small detail sent a chill down the investigators' spines. A worn notebook filled with Hackman's writing, but not scripts or notes about films, rather a list of basic tasks Betsy had written for him. How to turn on the lights, how to get water, when to take his medicine. A list that showed, despite being a silver screen legend, Hackman had become completely dependent on his wife to survive. And when she was gone, his world collapsed with her. If anyone had asked Hackman what the most important thing in his life was, he likely wouldn't mention his Oscars or fame. He would talk about Betsy, the one who witnessed both sides of his life, the brilliance and the decline. And without her, Hackman couldn't go on. Their story didn't end with a goodbye, but with silence, in an empty house, with an old man sitting there, lost in memories of days gone by. No applause, no flashing lights, just a Hollywood tragedy that no one could have predicted. When the FBI investigated the house, they noticed something strange. There was a small door in the basement, locked tight. A door that seemed to have been overlooked by everyone. And when they opened it, a secret tunnel appeared. No one knew where it led, no one knew why it was there. But one thing was certain, Gene Hackman's secrets didn't end there. If you want to follow more interesting stories and stay updated on the latest events, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to get the latest videos from us. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about these theories? We look forward to hearing your feedback so we can discuss and explore more fascinating stories together. The unnoticed absence. Gene Hackman's mansion in Santa Fe had always carried an air of formality before the pandemic. Hackman and his wife had become more reclusive than ever. No more gatherings with friends, no more long walks down the street, and even the few neighbors who had once seen Hackman began to forget when the last time they saw him was. For a Hollywood legend, someone who once captivated audiences on the silver screen, his disappearance from everyday life wasn't shocking. Hackman wasn't a fan of attention. He had long stepped away from the spotlight and had no desire to return. However, no one imagined that this absence would stretch on in such an eerie way. Hackman's close friends, who used to call him every week, began to notice the unusual silence. Unanswered messages, calls that went unanswered. At first, they thought they might be traveling. A longtime friend of Hackman recalled, "Gene and Betsy often enjoyed long trips. But then he realized that none of us knew where they had gone. No one could get in touch with them." Old friends from Hollywood also started to grow concerned. Hackman wasn't a social person, but he wasn't the type to disappear completely without leaving a trace. One of his friends decided to call Hackman's neighbor in Santa Fe. The response they received only deepened their suspicions. "I haven't seen them in a while," the neighbor said, "but I didn't think much of it. Gene is getting old. Maybe he just wanted some peace and quiet." No one suspected anything, and no one realized that a tragedy was unfolding within that house. On the first day, Hackman's mansion was just like any other day, with no signs of anything unusual. By the second day, the grass began to grow long, a clear sign that no one was taking care of it. On the third day, a few packages were left at the doorstep but went uncollected. On the fourth day, something strange began to happen. Their two dogs started barking incessantly. On the fifth day, a delivery person arrived and noted that the house was completely silent, everything frozen, with no lights, no sounds, no signs of life. On the sixth day, a few neighbors started to notice, but no one thought the situation was alarming. Then, the seventh day passed, and Gene Hackman's mansion remained completely quiet. A longtime friend of Hackman, feeling concerned about the strange absence, decided to request a welfare check from the police. "We've called him several times but received no response," they said. The local police received a request to check on Hackman and Betsy. However, with no signs of anything unusual, they did not consider it an urgent situation. When an officer checked the exterior of the mansion, they found the front door closed with no signs of forced entry. Inside, there were no sounds, no TV, no music, only an eerie silence. The officer knocked on the door, but no one answered, and they left, assuming that Hackman and Betsy simply did not want to be disturbed. But the truth was, they were too late. The police arrived at Hackman's mansion, and what they found left them stunned. The living room was undisturbed, the sofa neatly arranged, a cup of water still intact on the table, but when they entered the bedroom, the atmosphere grew cold. Hackman was still sitting there in his old armchair, his sunglasses still on, his thin hand resting on the armrest. He looked as if he were waiting for someone to wake him. And in the bedroom, Betsy Arakawa lay on the bed, pills scattered on the floor. But what really unsettled the officers wasn't the bedroom. It was when they checked the basement. They discovered a hidden door, one that no one had ever noticed before. And when they opened it, a secret tunnel appeared before them. They stood there, speechless, unable to prepare for what they were about to see inside. A scene of isolation and decay. Gene Hackman's mansion was always quiet, but today, that silence carried an eerie feeling. Tom Reyes, a local maintenance worker, was tasked with inspecting the nearby drainage system after residents reported a strange smell in the air. The smell wasn't overpowering, but there was something distinctly wrong about it. That morning, a maintenance worker was conducting routine checks when he noticed the front door of the house wide open, a strange sight for a mansion that was always meticulously maintained. After knocking several times without receiving a response, he decided to enter. What he found inside completely changed everything. Gene Hackman was discovered motionless at the entrance, while Betsy Arakawa's body was found in the bathroom. Both had been dead for several days, with clear signs of decomposition, indicating that they had been there for a long time without anyone knowing. However, the oddities didn't end with their deaths. When investigators conducted their initial check, they found no signs of forced entry. The door was intact, there were no signs of tampering, and everything in the house seemed undisturbed. At first, the case appeared to be a natural tragedy, an elderly couple passing away peacefully. However, as the investigation expanded, strange details began to emerge, making everything more ambiguous and suspicious. What seemed like a simple accident was actually hiding a complex story, filled with mysteries that even the investigators couldn't have anticipated. As one group of officers checked on Gene Hackman, the other entered the master bedroom. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, the dim light still on, and then they saw her. Betsy Arakawa lay motionless on the bathroom floor, in her nightgown, her legs curled up as if she had endured intense pain. A broken pill bottle lay on the floor, white pills scattered everywhere. Her hand loosely gripped a towel, and on the vanity was an open notebook with scribbled, unfinished notes. A chilling question arose. Did she fall, or did she choose this end? There were no signs of struggle, no signs of violence, but what had really happened in this room? The officers couldn't believe what they were seeing. Two people who had once been inseparable were now separated by a week of silence and oblivion. When they checked around, they noticed a strange detail. Hackman's 3 dogs were still alive, but one was not so lucky. A small dog lay dead in the corner of the kitchen, no signs of life left. The other 2 dogs, thin and frightened, ran and hid behind the officers as if they knew something terrible had happened. The coroner arrived quickly, but the police had a suspicion. Gene Hackman had likely passed away first, leaving Betsy alone in the silent house, and then she too had quietly passed. But what surprised them most wasn't theirs to investigate. The beam of his flashlight illuminated an old wooden door at the end of the hallway. This door wasn't in the house's blueprints, and when they opened it, a secret tunnel appeared before them. What lay inside left them breathless. When the forensic investigators began examining the bodies of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa, the initial theories about their deaths were quickly challenged. Initially, the police suspected that Hackman may have passed away due to old age and the late stages of Alzheimer's disease. But what about Arakawa? She had died first, suddenly, with no signs of struggle, no indications of external force, just a frail body and a spilled bottle of pills on the floor. But when the forensic results came back, everything became even more terrifying. The initial conclusion was that Gene Hackman died from a heart attack. His Alzheimer's disease had weakened his body, and his cardiovascular condition had worsened over time. With no one there to care for him, he slowly passed away without any signs of external force. Hackman died quietly in his chair in the mudroom, possibly from exhaustion or a sudden heart attack. But the most terrifying part wasn't just that Hackman had passed away. It was the absolute loneliness he must have endured in his final days. When the forensic experts examined Betsy Arakawa's body more closely, they discovered a shocking detail. She had contracted a dangerous virus that could cause severe respiratory failure and damage to internal organs. This virus is typically transmitted through contact with the feces, urine, or saliva of infected rodents, or by inhaling the virus when particles from rodent feces are dispersed in the air, or through contaminated food and drink. What was terrifying about this virus is that it can develop in the human body without clear symptoms for several days, meaning that Betsy could have been infected earlier, but the disease only truly manifested on the final day. The symptoms of this virus include sudden high fever, severe difficulty breathing, muscle pain, prolonged fatigue, and rapid respiratory failure. When the forensic investigators checked the living conditions in the house, they found numerous signs of rodents, which could have been the source of Arakawa's infection. But the biggest unanswered question remained. When did she contract the disease? And more importantly, was this the primary cause of her death? Not only were Hackman and Arakawa affected, but all 3 of their dogs were also impacted. One dog died before the police arrived, with the cause remaining unclear. The other 2 dogs survived, but their health had significantly deteriorated, showing signs of dehydration and malnutrition. Veterinarians concluded that all 3 dogs exhibited signs of respiratory infection, possibly due to a virus spread through the air inside the house. But how could a luxurious and well-maintained mansion like this become the breeding ground for such a dangerous virus? As the FBI and the investigative team continued to search the house, they noticed something unusual. The basement seemed to be absent from the original blueprints. A police officer discovered an old wooden door in the basement, a door that wasn't in any of the house's building documents. And when they opened it, a dark tunnel appeared before them. The atmosphere immediately became heavy. What awaited them inside? With flashlights in hand, they took slow, cautious steps down the stairs, and when the light shone on the far wall of the tunnel, they froze. As the police continued to search through Gene Hackman's mansion, a heavy and strange atmosphere enveloped the entire house. What they saw didn't resemble the home of a Hollywood legend. It seemed more like a place abandoned for weeks. There were no signs of life, except for two exhausted dogs, rotting food in the kitchen, some food left untouched, and no sign that Hackman had eaten for several days before his death. This raised a major question. Had he completely exhausted himself before passing away? The forensic report revealed that Hackman hadn't eaten in a long time, with no food in his stomach. This indicated that he couldn't care for himself in the final days without Arakawa by his side. Hackman may have been completely disoriented due to his advanced Alzheimer's disease. He couldn't remember how to call for help, couldn't prepare meals, and couldn't understand his surroundings. And so, as the days passed, the mansion slowly turned into a deadly trap. Another suspicious discovery was that the house's air conditioning system was completely turned off. During the hot summer months in Santa Fe, the temperature inside the house could rise above 35 degrees, 95 degrees. Without ventilation, the air inside became thick and oxygen-deprived. This stifling atmosphere might have caused Hackman to fall into a coma before he passed away. But why was the air conditioning turned off? Did Hackman forget to turn it on? Did Arakawa turn it off before leaving? Or was there another unexplored reason behind it? The police found no signs of a power outage, meaning the system was still functioning normally. Someone had intentionally turned it off, but who and why? What chilled the investigative team was the absence of any signs of everyday life. There were no new emails or messages on Hackman's phone, no visitors to the villa for weeks, and no grocery bills or food deliveries for over a month. The villa seemed to have been abandoned by Hackman, or perhaps he no longer had the ability to maintain a normal life. However, the greatest mystery lay in the basement. When one of the officers discovered an old wooden door in the basement, it was a door that wasn't in the original blueprints of the house. Why was it there? When they opened the door, a spiral staircase descended into the darkness. A strange smell rose from below, making the investigators shiver. They shone their flashlights down, and a hidden tunnel appeared. What lay inside left them stunned. Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa were not unfamiliar figures. They were once one of Hollywood's most famous couples, with friends in high places and fans following their every move. However, when they disappeared within their own home, no one noticed anything unusual. Why? Because they lived very privately. After Hackman retired in 2004, he completely withdrew from Hollywood, even turning down rare interview requests. He and Arakawa led a peaceful, quiet life with no social media, and family and friends rarely contacted them. Those close to them said Hackman became increasingly withdrawn, even from those closest to him. Neighbors didn't suspect anything. Hackman's estate was located in a secluded area of Santa Fe, and his lack of outings wasn't surprising, as he had maintained this habit for many years. Who was the first to uncover the truth? A maintenance worker was hired to check the house after no one answered the phone for several days. When he entered the estate, the world of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa had fallen into eternal silence. Betsy Arakawa was found to have contracted the H virus, a dangerous virus transmitted through the feces or urine of rodents. But the strange thing was that there were no signs of mice or rodents in the house. Hackman was not infected by the virus. If there was a source of contamination in the house, why was Arakawa the only one affected? Some theories suggest that she might have contracted the disease during a recent trip, but credit card data shows she hadn't left Santa Fe for months before her death. Could someone have brought the virus into the house? But why? These questions remain unanswered, and the appearance of the H virus only adds to the mystery surrounding Betsy Arakawa's death. Gene Hackman is one of Hollywood's greatest actors, with a career spanning over 40 years, and iconic films such as Unforgiven, The French Connection, Superman, and The Royal Tenenbaums. However, after retiring, he virtually disappeared from the spotlight. He stopped attending award ceremonies, avoided events, and cut off contact with most of his old friends. The life of a man who once stood at the pinnacle of glory has now become that of an empty mansion and years of solitude in his final days. When Hackman passed away, there were no loved ones by his side, no grand memorial, no heartfelt eulogies from colleagues, just a silent house, an unsolved mystery, and a cinematic legacy that will endure forever. People will remember Gene Hackman as one of the greatest actors of all time, with 2 Oscars and dozens of classic films, or as a man who spent his final years in isolation, leaving the world without anyone knowing. The truth is that Hackman's story serves as a reminder of the fragility of life. No matter how brightly you shine, in the end, the most important thing is having someone by your side when the spotlight fades. For Gene Hackman, that light dimmed in an empty house, but his legacy will live on forever. The story of Gene Hackman and the secrets hidden beneath his mansion is sure to make you reflect. These strange discoveries not only reveal the darker corners of a Hollywood legend's life, but also raise unresolved questions full of mystery. What do you think about these secrets? Could they change the way we view Hackman and his private life? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your opinions. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next video, where we'll continue to explore mysterious stories and shocking discoveries. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. And don't forget to share this video with your friends so we can explore these mysterious things together that we never thought possible.